Hello, my name is Kayla Dwyer, Editor-in-Chief of the Ithacan. I'm here with Tom Kertscher, the watchdog reporter for PolitiFact Wisconsin for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. So we will be talking about his reporting that led to the Netflix series Making a Murderer, which reported on the case of Stephen Avery, who was wrongly convicted in 1985 of rape and attempted murder. He was exonerated via DNA evidence in 2003. Then he was later convicted again for another murder, but we will get to that. So we're here to talk about his original reporting that led to this big Netflix phenomenon now, and sort of the differences in public perceptions then and now, and more details about the case. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, you bet.
So, can you take us back to 2003? How did you get on top of this story when it first broke with the DNA evidence?
2003, I'm a general assignment reporter for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, working in a tiny suburban office, and was talking to a local attorney about a local story. Ended the conversation the way I often do, saying, "Hey, is there anything else we should be writing about out there?" And the attorney said, "Well, there's this guy named Stephen Avery." At that time, nobody really knew who he was. But the tip led to a story that I broke that Stephen Avery would be exonerated of a sexual assault committed 18 years earlier in 1985 and released from prison. So that was really the first story that got national attention of Stephen Avery, was how he was exonerated.
So what was the public reaction at that time to his exoneration? And given the reporting that you did about the sort of almost lack of evidence against him when he was convicted?
I think when he was released, it was not unprecedented, but still a pretty rare occurrence in Wisconsin. And so I think there was a fair amount of sympathy for him, because not only did the newly developed DNA testing prove that he was innocent, but it proved that another man committed the sexual assault. And as my later reporting revealed, the law enforcement had been aware of this other guy, but just didn't pursue the leads at the time, and instead focused on Avery. So I think there was a lot of sympathy in that respect too, that not only was he wrongly identified as the perpetrator, but had the local law enforcement done a better job, they would have found the real perpetrator right away. There was probably still in his home county of Manitowoc some wariness maybe about Stephen Avery. He'd had some run-ins with the law prior to the sexual assault case. Nothing that had put him in prison, but things that had concerned the community. And I think there was a feeling among some residents around Manitowoc that maybe he was a guy who you wouldn't necessarily want to run into. And so there was that feeling about him that, gee, it's certainly been proven that he didn't commit the sexual assault, but some wariness, at least on the part of some residents, about him generally.
And around that time, I read some of your work around then. September 20th, 2003, you wrote that the case against him had become a virtual steamroller. Mm-hmm. I was wondering if you could describe what you meant by that, and what went on in terms of the sheriff's department and the things they ignored, or the things that, why they suddenly latched onto him as the suspect.
Yeah, so ideally you're hoping that law enforcement authorities will consider all possible suspects and follow the evidence to where it takes them. In this case, some people refer to it as tunnel vision, where for whatever reason, people in the sheriff's department who responded to the sexual assault believed that he was likely the suspect. They really kind of fixated on him right away. So steamroller in the sense that sheriff's officials felt like Avery was the perpetrator, put him in a lineup right away with some other people. The victim in the case picked Avery out of the lineup, but after some, I guess you could say, coaching or suggestion that maybe he was the guy, the other people in the lineup, for whatever it matters, didn't really look much like Avery either. So steamroller in the sense that they focused on him right away rather than considering other possible suspects, ignoring evidence that would have pointed to the other suspect. And a steamroller in the sense that the victim of the sexual assault was someone whose credibility I don't think was ever doubted. She was a prominent businesswoman, articulate, and so as a witness, was very persuasive. Had been convinced, after going through the process of identifying Avery, she was convinced that he had committed the assault. And so you've got, on the one hand, someone from an arguably lower socioeconomic background who's had some scrapes with the law, who's not liked by law enforcement. On the other hand, you've got a victim who people are naturally sympathetic to, who's also prominent in the community and is giving strong eyewitness testimony. It wasn't too surprising looking at that the jury would find him guilty of the sexual assault.
Mm-hmm. Now, Avery was a stranger to you before you had heard of this case. Is that right?
Right.
But you did get the opportunity to meet with him a few times between the time he was exonerated and the time he was convicted again for, at this time, in the separate murder. What were your impressions of him? Did you feel that he deserved sympathy, or, what were your general impressions?
Yeah, so I had several encounters with him. None, we certainly didn't become confidants or have long conversations. But shortly after he was released from prison, sat down with him in person a couple of times. And he did share that, sure, I'm relieved to be out of prison after all this time, and people finally believe me that I didn't do it. At the same time, he was pretty distressed, and I think he, especially in those first weeks after being released, didn't know where he fit in. He had been part of the Avery family auto salvage business, but now his brothers are really running it. He didn't really know his place. He had a place to live on the family property there, but didn't have a regular job. Initially, he said, a lot of times life was easier in prison than it is out here. My blood pressure's higher now than it was in prison. So, you get a picture of a guy who was, certainly relieved and grateful to be free, but struggling with how to deal with that. So that was, back in 2003 after he was out of prison. We thought really that would be the end of the story. 2 years later, 2005, a woman goes missing. She's last seen with Stephen Avery, and the worries start about what happened to this woman. Was he involved in any way? Initially, it's a missing person case, but pretty quickly the authorities determined that the woman, Teresa Halbach, had been murdered. And so speculation, of course, focused on Avery. He was the last one known to see her alive. But there was a period of more than a week where this murder is being investigated, but no arrests are made. Stephen Avery's still free. He's at home, and he's very accessible to I think, any media. You knock on his door with a camera, he would probably talk to you. You call him on the phone, he would probably give you the interview on the spot.
Wow.
And so, in that sort of tense time there, a week or so after Teresa Halbach was missing, but before there was an arrest, we were, as reporters, in contact with him a lot. I was calling him daily to find out what was happening. Did he know anything more? Had the police told him anything? And I was on the phone with him one afternoon, I think about 1 o'clock on a weekday, and we just started the conversation, and it abruptly ended. He said, they're taking me to jail, I can't talk to you no more. And literally the sheriff's deputies had come to put the handcuffs on him and take him away. And probably his last phone call as a free man. And that's the last sort of personal contact I've had with him. But I will say that from the very beginning, after Teresa Halbach went missing, he was very consistent about saying, they're trying to do this to me again. They got it wrong the first time. They're trying to get back at me this time. They're trying to frame me. I didn't do it.
And he was in the middle then of a civil lawsuit, a very hefty one, $36 million, against the county sheriff's department. How was it then that I know that the county sheriff's department, they shifted the investigation into a different county, but I read reports that they still had some hand in the investigations. How was that possible?
And I think that's one of the main things that was disturbing to viewers of Making a Murder, particularly if they were not aware of the case before. Excuse me, the involvement of the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department had been reported, but for a lot of the viewers of Making a Murder, they weren't aware of those details. So you're right, after he was released from prison on the sexual assault case, filed the $36 million lawsuit against the county for his wrongful conviction. That case was pending when Teresa Halbach went missing, so there was concern and accusations on his part that, hey, these guys are trying to pin a murder on me because they don't want me to win $36 million. You know, naturally you would think because of that potential conflict or perceived conflict of interest, the murder case shouldn't be investigated by Manitowoc County. They're being sued by the guy who they've identified as the suspect in the murder. So the sheriff's department in the neighboring county took over the investigation, and the sheriff in that county said, you know, we're taking over Manitowoc, won't have anything to do with this, but they did. And there were several deputies from the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department on the Stephen Avery property, questioning people, gathering evidence, and that's what led to a lot of the angry reaction in making a murder, because we had these sheriff's deputies who shouldn't have been part of the murder case at all, arguably had a reason because of the lawsuit to plant evidence to frame Avery, and that's really how that theory developed, because they were in fact not only involved in the investigation, but in some cases uncovered key evidence.
So how did you feel about, since you were so closely involved in reporting on this case for so long, about how the Netflix series portrayed the intricacies of it all and how they weighed placing emphasis on Avery as a person versus the treatment of the evidence?
I mean, the series is quite thorough. 10 hours devoted to any case is a lot. At the same time, they're trying to distill it to 10 hours, more than 5 weeks of trial testimony, a lot of evidence. So obviously things were left out. Some people have criticized the filmmakers for leaving out various pieces of evidence. I guess I'm not so bothered by that. That's just part of the process. You can't present everything, and people can always cite something or another that wasn't included. I think what people need to keep in mind, though, is while the series is very thorough, it's also told from a point of view. The filmmakers were essentially embedded with Stephen Avery's family, Stephen Avery's attorneys, and so when you're spending that much time with sort of one side of the story, your documentary is going to have a certain feel to it. And what I say is, and there's nothing wrong with that, I think the perspective they took is legitimate, but just imagine how the series might have felt different, looked different, had the filmmakers been embedded with the family of Teresa Halbach, the murder victim, or the prosecutors. It would just be a very different story. So I think it's a valuable contribution. They drew in many, many viewers who probably had never paid close attention to the criminal justice process before, raised healthy questions about how are these cases investigated. But it's just important to remember that it is told from a point of view.
Right. Did you ever get to meet the filmmakers?
Yeah, I met them early in the process, actually. They, after the news broke that Stephen Avery was the suspect in the murder, in late 2005, the filmmakers came to Wisconsin to pursue, looking into doing a documentary. They came to Milwaukee to interview me primarily about the reporting I had done in the sexual assault case, and I had written quite a bit revealing how the local law enforcement had ignored evidence that pointed to the real perpetrator in that case. So they interviewed me for that. Not a lot of contact with them afterward. They were sort of ever present and in the background. So they spent a lot of time in Wisconsin well before the trial. I think they were there for every day of the trial. I don't think they missed a thing. There were daily news conferences after each day of testimony. They were always there for that. But I don't think they ever asked a question that I can recall at those news conferences. And they really were just, a couple of filmmakers with a camera kind of in the background taking it all in. I think if you happened upon them in the hallway at the courthouse during the trial, it wouldn't have caught your attention that they were doing something very different.
Right. So when you were live tweeting your watching of the series, one tweet of yours really stuck out to me. You said that years of covering a murder case like this seeps into your pores and alters your dreams. Can you talk about that? I mean, how has it done that for you?
I should say it's an accumulation of covering cases like that. So not just the Avery case, but having covered other murder trials over the years. When you immerse yourself in the details, you're reading arrest reports, criminal complaints, you're watching testimony, you're interviewing investigators. It's a lot of detail and a lot of gory stuff. And, it really does at some point affect you. And I think more so the older I got. I think, when I was younger, those things roll off you a little bit more. Get a little bit older, you have a child of your own, things are different, and it really did, it kind of gets into your consciousness. Your dreams are affected, sometimes even your daytime thinking. And so when Making a Murder was released, and I found out it was 10 hours, I really had no interest in seeing it. I thought, this is a lot of unpleasant stuff. Regardless of who was rightly or wrongly convicted, the murder was gory, and I just didn't want to spend 10 hours of downtime, my own time, watching something that would probably be upsetting, even if it was very well done and very intriguing. So I had decided not to watch it at all, and then, but it became such a phenomenon. Within days, my editor said, you have to watch it and you have to write about it. So, that put me in a different perspective than it was a work assignment, a work time thing, and it was to write an analysis of the film, not just, sort of rehash the case. And I'm so thankful a reporter friend of mine suggested the live tweeting. And that was a brand new experience for me. I'd been active on Twitter for a period of years, and through our fact checking for PolitiFact, we might live tweet a debate, something like that things the candidates say that we fact check. But it's very different to sort of hole up in your house for 2 days, have the pizza being delivered and immerse yourself in this film for 10 hours. And then sharing your reaction to it as you feel it. I didn't watch it for 10 hours and then go back and write. It was, as I was watching it, it was all new to me, responding to it. I would stop and then go back and look at stories I'd written and that sort of thing so I could give perspective. But I didn't know how interesting the series would be to me. I didn't know if I'd have one tweet a day or 6 an hour, or, would I have much to say or not. But, on a small scale, a huge increase in my following. I think, just in those 2 days went from 400 followers to 2,000, just one measure of the interest in that film. And gave me a new perspective on social media that up to that point I'd pretty much been just sharing articles that I wrote or that I thought might be interesting to people. Now I was had more of a voice, and I was saying, okay, you saw this in the film, you also need to consider this, or this scene really triggered reaction from a lot of people. If you're interested in more, go read. Here's a link to the story I wrote about the evidence at the time. Right. And so you really felt like you were, helping viewers along. It was more than just reporting what happened. It was sharing my perspective from having been there since the beginning.
Have those, 13 years now, have they gone by quickly for you or excruciatingly slowly?
Well, it's certainly the longest story I've ever covered. It's been not constant, but off and on for 13 years and more to come. There's never been a story that just keeps developing new interest, right? He's exonerated, he's implicated in murder, then he's convicted, then there's this international phenomenon around him. Now there's talk of work on a second season of Making a Murder. Both Stephen Avery and his nephew Brendan Dassey, who was also convicted of the murder, they're both back in court, trying to get their convictions thrown out. So it's hard to see that it ends anytime soon. And I think the fact that I've been able to go on and report on other things, besides PolitiFact, I do some freelance writing actually for college alumni magazines, lighter stuff that I enjoy. Wow. I do some freelancing for Associated Press covering pro sports in Milwaukee. So I get some good diversions, and that helps keep the Making a Murder case interesting as well.
We certainly need some diversions, I'll say. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, you're welcome. It's great.
Lovely to meet you.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you for watching.